Austin Forrest Pevo was a 23-year-old from Fort Hall, Idaho. He disappeared on February 3rd, 2018. Unfound covered his disappearance on June 7th, 2019. In early September 2019, human bones were found on the Fort Hall Reservation. In early April 2020, those remains were determined to be Austin's. 3 men are now in custody for his murder. Today we remember Austin by replaying his episode. I'm Ed Dentzel, and this is Unfound. I realized when you saw the title for this episode, you thought of the Tom Cruise film. It was a good one, although given the premise, the movie could have been better. However, my perception is people forget why that film has that title. The reason was because sometimes one of the young people who could see the future would see a different one than the other two. And that opinion was called, well, the title of the film. And it plays a huge role in the plot. Today, Unfound is doing kind of the same thing. Through the interview, we'll be giving you a different opinion on what could have happened in this disappearance. And we are not in the majority, as you will hear, especially when local law enforcement is concerned. However, the title is for another reason as well. We at Unfound are really trying to bring attention to disappearances where the missing person isn't white, Anglo-Saxon, and Protestant. In fact, it's my fault that I never mentioned during the Kelly Sims episode that she was Native American. Well, so is today's missing person, Austin Pevo, who disappeared from the Fort Hall Reservation in Idaho. We at Unfound believe these groups deserve more attention, and we're trying to do what we can, and we hope these families will respond to our messages, and they surely can contact us anytime, African Americans, Hispanics, Asians, whoever, because we want to continue to file our own Minority Report. And now, summary of the case. This is brought to you by my friend Making Good's website, charlieproject.org. Austin Pevo was a member of the Shoshone-Bannock tribe and raised on the Fort Hall Reservation. However, he went to high school where most of his classmates were white. Austin excelled at sports there and did well with his studies. He was going to go to college, but decided to become a firefighter instead. When Austin had time, he also went out of town to Native American dance competitions where he won money. However, in his early 20s, he got mixed up with the wrong crowd, getting into drugs and having friends with criminal records. Yet, not long before Austin disappeared, he seemed to be on the right track again. So, on February 3rd, 2018, Austin's mother Susan dropped him off at his boss's house, as she usually did. However, his mother would not find out till the next day that work was canceled due to the supervisor being hung over from the night before. What then happened, Susan learned, was that Austin used either the work phone or a co-worker's cell phone to call someone since Austin didn't have his phone with him. He then walked out the door. He was never seen again. Austin's disappearance has a lot less facts than many others we've covered on Unfound. However, the facts that we do know have generated the following questions. Number 1. Why did no one in the neighborhood see Austin walking down the street after he left his boss's house? Number 2. Why is it still unclear whose phone Austin used at his workplace, not to mention who exactly he called? And number 3. Could a run-in the night before between Austin and a guy he thought was a friend be the cause of this disappearance? Both the local police and tribal officers have been somewhat unhelpful in this disappearance. Their belief is Austin just walked off on his own. Austin's family believes differently. The guest for this episode is Austin's mother, Susan Pevo. Unfound News. It's the first Friday of May, so you know what that means. Did you get your newsletter? If you're on the email list, you should have. If not, please contact me at unfoundpodcast@gmail.com. If you believe you're on the list but didn't get the newsletter, please check your email program's spam folder. Next, May 7th, that's this coming Thursday, at 6 p.m. Eastern, I will be doing my interview with Dr. Grace Telesco from Nova Southeastern University. Maybe you've already seen the preview video we recorded about a week ago. To be able to view the 1-hour live interview, you will have to go to the school's Fischler College of Education and School of Criminal Justice page on Facebook. This will be a Facebook live show. Once again, May 7th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. Finally, on May 9th at 8:30 p.m. Eastern on the Lorden Arts YouTube channel, I will be taking part in a live game show run by John Lorden himself. This will be a fundraiser for the organization Feeding America. Viewers will be able to donate while watching myself and other true crime podcast hosts compete. I thank John for asking me to participate, and I hope all of you will tune in and contribute. I will be playing to win. I just hope I can keep my inner John McEnroe at bay. Where you can find Unfound. Unfound supports accounts on Podomatic, iTunes, Stitcher, Instagram, Twitter, Spotify, Deezer, and Facebook. On Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, please join us on the Unfound podcast channel on YouTube for the Unfound live show. All of you can speak with me, and I can answer your questions. And for Patreon this week, I need to thank Ariel, Tammy, and Lily. I'm so happy to have on this episode of Unfound the mother of Austin Pevo, Susan Pevo. Susan, welcome to Unfound.
Hi.
I want to start here with you, and it seems to me this has been in the news a lot about the disappearance of many Native Americans in the United States, and not long ago last year we covered the disappearance of some Native Americans in Canada as well. But you are Native American. Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about your community in Idaho?
I live on the Fort Hall Indian Reservation here in Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
It's between Blackfoot and Pocatello. It's a small community. Everybody knows one another, and I would almost want to say the majority of the people who you meet are related to you one way or another, whether it be on your mother, father, or grandparents' side.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's really a close community in certain ways.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. Me and my son are not. My family are not enrolled here. We're enrolled Eastern Shoshone from Fort Washakie, Wyoming, on the Wind River Indian Reservation there.
Okay.
But we we're born here, raised here on this reservation, so I could almost say that this is, like my home reservation, but it's not.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How many people would you say live there?
I would say about maybe 8,000 to 10,000.
Wow. Okay.
But those are people that there are people that live off the reservation, give or take, that live in other communities and, out of state.
Okay.
Maybe there's more.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay, but you say it's a tight-knit community. Everybody seems to know everybody.
Yes.
Okay. All right. That's interesting to me because as I was telling you right before we started this interview that Emily and I have tried to, within the last few months, tried to reach out to more Native American people, families who have lost loved ones in the Native American community. And we're trying to make that happen here in 2019, once again, because she and I have both read the articles, not just in Idaho, but all over the United States. And about the issues that Native Americans are having regarding disappearances, and we're trying to put a little bit more of a spotlight on that. Would you say in your community that you're aware of that? That there maybe
Yes.
seems to be an issue?
Yes, there is. There's an issue, and since my son, probably in the last 6 months, I've been trying to get the community aware of what's happening, not, outside of the reservation, because right now it's getting close to, it is close here on the reservation here in Fort Hall, where this is becoming, I shouldn't say more prominent, but it's becoming, but it's becoming more. There's another young gentleman that's already missing already.
Right.
And he's been missing since March,
Right.
And who's to say that there's some younger people, the teenagers that are missing now. And, and I'm trying to get people aware that this is happening. Yeah. And it could happen to anybody's family.
Yeah. Certainly true. Okay. And I do want to talk about that a little bit later in our interview. We will come back to that. So let's move on to Austin specifically. You were his mother. Tell the listeners a little bit about Austin. First of all, does he have any other does he have any brothers and sisters?
He has 2 older brothers. Before Austin was born, I was going through a lot of things, a lot of personal problems, and they both got adopted out to family members in my family. Okay. So he kind of grew up without them, or in the immediate family, but he knew his brothers. He knew his older brother, and the second son, the middle son. Sorry, the middle son. He grew up in Washington with my sister. So, and okay. They all knew each other. So, but it always felt like my Austin was like my only child, because I raised him. I was, been there, did a lot of things with them.
Right. Right. So even like and maybe it's a little bit my situation where I was raised an only child, but I had 2 brothers and a sister. But what you're saying is you essentially raised Austin by himself.
Yes.
Okay. So you didn't have any children after Austin?
No.
Okay. All right. What kind of kid was Austin?
When he was little and growing up, he was just a little happy child, He just always fun to be around. He grew up, with his cousins, and he was the youngest out of all of them. Out of all his cousins and his brothers, he was the youngest, and so he was kind of like always, the one that got picked on that, he was just. But he was a little fighter,
Yeah.
He'd always, even though he got picked on, he would just bounce right back up and have a big smile on his face and didn't care and be right there hanging with them again,
Mm-hmm.
And then when he got older, he grew up tough. I didn't want him to be, I don't know, some parents let their kids just not, do anything, be real protective over their children. But I never wanted him to be like that. I wanted him to be a tough, even though he was like an only child, I let him, put him in sports when he was young. I didn't want him to be, I'll put it this way, a wimpy child.
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
He played football. He played basketball. He played baseball. He even wrestled. He was He
Wow.
was a good student. Even when he was little, I taught him early on in before he went to school, his ABCs, his 1, 2, 3s. He already knew how to tell time before he got into kindergarten. He was just. I wanted him just to be that much more ahead of everybody before
Yeah.
he went to school.
Yeah.
And he was just a smart kid.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I always thought he was too smart for his own good.
A little too smart. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
That's funny. Now, you did tell me, I believe, that although you live on a reservation, you told me that he went to a high school that was predominantly white people, Caucasian people. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. How did
Yeah.
that go for him?
He grew up. It was just normal for him.
Okay.
It was just a normal life. He really didn't have anything, like I want to say ill feelings toward anybody.
Mm-hmm.
He grew up knowing that even though there was probably about 5 or 6 Native Americans that he went to school with in the whole high school, he didn't really have, ill feelings toward anybody. He wasn't, not racial or anything like that.
No racial problems, anything like that?
No.
Good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's good to hear. What high school, if you can say, what high school was it?
He went to American Falls High School.
Okay.
In American Falls.
Okay, great. Okay, so he was into sports, and he sounds like a guy who his mother told him to not take any crap from anybody. And do you have any girlfriends in high school? What was the situation there?
No, he really didn't have any girlfriends. He had a lot of friends that were girls,
mm-hmm.
but he wasn't really the type of kid to have girlfriends, even though girls liked him. But I've always just told him, wait till you get out of high school. I don't want you to have kids when you're young. I want you to go out and experience life.
Yeah.
I want you to, enjoy life and not have, worry about children.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Well, I think a lot of parents worry about those things, of course. Okay. He graduated from high school, and what did he do?
At first, he really didn't know what to do. He wanted to go away to Haskell University in Lawrence, Kansas. He put his application in, but he got denied, and I never knew or understood why he ever got denied. He was a good student. He got A's and B's. He played. He lettered all 4 years in high school on the football team.
Huh.
But for some odd reason, he wasn't selected to go to that college. But then he wanted to go to enlist into the Marines, but his grandmother, my mom, she was against it, and she gave her opinion.
Okay.
Yeah, and that he changed his mind on that, and he decided not to go. Based upon what my mom had told him.
How did you feel about that? If I can ask, how did you feel about it?
I kind of thought my mom overstepped her boundaries, and I wanted him to go, because I thought it would have been good for him, to get out there and see the world more.
Yeah. Yeah, and also
like I said,
yeah, sure.
I just wanted him to be independent, and along the way, when he was little, back when he was a little, a baby, I would make an outfit for him, a regalia outfit, so he could dance at powwows. And he was what we call as a grass dancer, and he grew up being a grass dancer all the way till he got to be like 13, 14 years old, and then he started dancing. He wanted to dance a different style. He wanted to be a round bustle dancer, and which is a traditional dancer. So my dad had given him his round bustle that he wore when he was still dancing.
Mm-hmm.
And that he was like 13 or 14 years old when he got that bustle from my dad. And
so that was kind of passing it from one generation to the next.
yeah,
Okay.
actually skipping a whole generation.
Okay.
Would be like the 2 generations down.
Okay.
And we would travel to different powwows to different states, and he was a good dancer. A lot of people gave me props on him.
Yeah.
Told me that he was a natural dancer. He danced from his heart and from the inside, and and.
Well, no wonder he had a lot of women friends, because women love guys that can dance. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, he certainly did have a lot of women, young ladies, chasing after him, but he never.
Okay.
Never really had settled down with one, not till after high school and stuff.
Okay. Well, let's talk about after high school. So. He got denied to this college, didn't end up going to the Marines. Did he end up getting a job? What did he end up doing?
He ended up becoming a firefighter, wildland firefighter. BLM land wildfire. I think I said that right. For the BLM.
Okay.
It was it's like a tradition. My dad went, I went, my sons went, my older son went. And then him being the youngest, he went,
Okay.
He went to fight fires, and he loved it.
Okay. And is that what he did? Of course, we know that he disappeared when he was 23. I'm going to guess that he graduated high school when he was 17 or 18. Is that what he did for a majority of that time, or did he have any other jobs?
No, that's what he did. That was he did. He did it for the fire season, wow. And then after fire season ended, then he would powwow. He would travel. He would, and he would. I'll put it this way: he was a really good dancer, and he would come home. Sometimes first place, second place. He would come home.
Wow, competition. So competitions like.
Yeah,
dancing competitions. Okay, that's it. Okay, I didn't know about that. Okay, all right. Well, he must have been good if and he would make some money doing that.
Yeah.
Wow, he must have been good. Okay. All right, so that's what he was doing. However, there were some things that did happen that, once again, in our prior conversations, that you believe kind of affected him, and we are going to get into some things that he was struggling with. But one thing that you told me that really affected him was his grandfather dying. Why don't you tell the listeners about that?
My dad was a big part of his life.
Mm-hmm. And so they were close. And when did your father die?
August of 2017.
Okay. And that really had an effect on him.
Yeah, he really looked up to my dad, and his grandfather. His grandfather had taught him a lot of things,
Yeah.
From traditional ways, to doing things. He was always there for. My dad was always there for him,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it really affected him.
Yeah.
Okay.
He just felt like to me, it seemed like he was lost,
After
as well as, yeah.
After that happened.
I think it affected him more. I shouldn't say more. It affected him a lot, and he would just take off. Just, get upset at every little thing, and he would just, take off. And he'd be gone for, like, the whole day, and then he'd come back, and he'd, and it was a never-ending thing after that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Was this death sudden, or was it something that was drawn out?
it was a sudden death.
Was it?
Okay. There was a fire. It was a fire that year, and my dad, he was an older gentleman, in his 80s, and
Mm-hmm.
and being the man that my dad is, he didn't want to leave his ranch, and
Oh my!
he made my mom leave. He made my other brother and my granddaughter at that time that was staying there with my son, and he just my dad and my older son stayed, and my dad didn't want to leave. He just
And so there was like are you saying this was like a forest fire?
Yeah, they live out in the country,
Mm-hmm.
and the fire, lightning struck somewhere and it just took off. It was really dry that year, and it surrounded it. It was really devastating.
Okay.
It just literally took everything out, and it was amazing that their place didn't burn down.
Okay.
It took everything around their house, and yeah.
Okay. But your dad got caught up in this fire and couldn't escape. Is that what happened?
It was the smoke.
It was the smoke. Yeah, the smoke.
And then,
okay.
Yeah, and then.
Okay. All right. And something else that you told me about was that a friend of Austin's actually got murdered. His name is Francisco Martinez. He got murdered. When did this happen? Why did this happen?
Why he got murdered, from what I understand and from what I heard from his grandmother, was that it happened over credit cards, and it was, I don't know whether it was a drug deal, she said, but she believes that drugs were involved. Okay. But it had to deal with credit cards, stolen credit cards. I mean, he didn't steal them. This other guy thought he stole him, so he ended up killing him over non-stolen credit cards.
So like mistaken identity or something like that?
Yeah. And then they tried to, I think what upset him was because of the fact that he got killed, and then they tried to burn his body. That's what was really upsetting to him, was that, and we had just barely, me and Austin just barely had seen Cisco like 3 days before. Mm-hmm. We had given him a ride. We were going to my niece's daughter's birthday party, and we happened to stop at a dollar store, and we seen Cisco, and he goes, "Hey Mom, can we give him a ride?" And I said, "Yeah, that's fine." So we gave him a ride, just like 3 or 4 blocks down the road, and we had dropped him off at this trailer park.
Yeah.
And he got out of the car and he goes, "Hey man, take it easy and take care of yourself." He goes, "You know where I'm at? You can always stop by, Mm-hmm. He just told me, "Take care of yourself," and that was the last time you seen him.
Wow.
And that was just like 3 days before. And I think he took it really hard because, they went to school together.
Right.
He was just a little guy, and he always watched out for him and took care of him while he was in high school. Didn't let other people pick on him.
When did this happen? When did that happen?
I want to say around September, October. It was in the fall time, I remember.
Of 2017?
Yeah.
Okay, so just to put this in the timeline, your father, Austin's grandfather, he dies from this fire and the smoke in August, and then a month or 2 later, one of Austin's best friends gets murdered.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Were the person or persons responsible for this murder caught?
Yeah, they were caught.
Okay.
And
they're in jail. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move. All right, so that I can understand. So we're talking about 6 months before both those situations happened. About 6 months before Austin disappeared. But you also told me that one of the things you think that came of this, that maybe Austin started getting involved in some drugs or something like that. He was so affected by all of this.
Yeah, I knew that he was doing some kind of drugs just by
Mm-hmm.
the way he was acting. He would just out of it. It wasn't his normal self, you know.
Yeah.
I seen a change in him. You know, he was more like rage. He was just, you know, it wasn't
Angry.
physical.
Angry.
It was angry. It was just the rage inside of him. You could just see it and hear it, his tone of voice, and then pretty soon he'd be like 2-3 seconds later, or even a minute or whatever, his whole thing demeanor would change. Then he would be all like da da da, real happy and whatever, and then you know
Mm-hmm.
sometimes he would be up for days and days, and then he'd
Uh,
you know, and then he'd be gone, and then he'd come back, and he would just sleep for days, you know, wake up, go back to sleep, wake up, go back to sleep, you know, and that wasn't him, and you know, I knew that.
okay.
You know, you could just
Mm,
see the physical change in him as well. You
right.
know, he stopped going to powwows. He stopped singing. He stopped, you know, associating with his other friends. I see him started associating with different people, people I didn't know, people I've never seen before,
Mm-hmm.
people, you know, that I wouldn't associate with.
Right. Did you ask him about this stuff? I mean, could you have a conversation with him about it, or did he not want to talk about it?
A little bit of both. You know, he would like brush it off and just say, "Oh well, you know, it's just experimental. You don't worry about it, Mom. I
Mm-hmm.
got this."
Okay.
You know,
Okay.
his favorite
Uh, but
words. I got this,
you,
Mom.
but you never specifically ever saw him take any drugs in the house.
No,
Okay.
I've seen him smoke marijuana. You know,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, I really, to me, that didn't bother me. It was the other kind of drugs that he was
Right.
starting to do: the
Right.
meth, the oxys, the hydros.
Mm-hmm. He might have gotten an addiction to essentially what are painkillers that we now know that these opioid addiction that many millions and millions of Americans are suffering with right now. And you think that your son got caught up in that as well?
I do believe he did.
Okay. All right. But you had told me also, though, that not long before he disappeared, that it seemed to you that he had an epiphany, that he said, you know what, I need to get sober, that he said he wanted to go back to school. Do you remember when that conversation or those conversations happened?
It was around the time of his birthday
Okay.
in December, you know, mid-December. You know, he was like, "Mom, I need a change. We just need a change of life. You know, I need to get out of doing what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to school." You know, and it made me feel good
I bet it did.
knowing that he wanted to change his life. He wanted to get away from what he was doing and to get on with his life, to start his life. You know, and
Mm-hmm.
that and to me that was him making a change out of what he was doing and wanted to get away from it.
Mm-hmm. Right. And in your opinion, between when he told you that in December, and we know that he disappeared in February of 2018. In fact, this is the newest disappearance that Unfound has ever covered. Of course, at this point, it's like about a year and 4 months old. Did you see some changes? Was that just talk, or did you see some changes in him between then and when he disappeared?
Yeah. I started seeing him gain more weight. He got, he started gaining weight again. He started looking more healthy, and he
Good.
wasn't. He got a job. He got a job working with being a laborer. And that was good. To me, that showed me that he was doing rather than not doing things with his life.
Okay.
Like some people just live every day with not doing nothing. But he started doing something, got a job, and he was, to me, he was showing me that he was being responsible.
Good. And you actually knew his boss, and we're going to be talking about him later, but he ended up working for somebody who you knew.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So he had some issues there in 2017 that I think that most people would go, it would negatively affect them losing a grandparent, like the way that it happened. I lost my mother within the last 6 months, and I know that, people we all experience this, death is a part of life. So, and grandparents and parents dying, you go to some dark places sometimes when those things happen. So I don't think that's unusual for Austin. And then on top of that, to have one of his friends murdered, and he saw him just a few days before that. Very tough thing for a young man to go through. But in your opinion, by the time late 2017, 2018 rolled around, it sounds like he had fought through that and was coming out the other side.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So before we actually get into, the day before, and we have a lot to talk about there, we do have to go through a couple names so the listeners can understand, because their name, these people are going to come up very shortly. Just in general, we'll talk about him specifically eventually, probably in a few minutes, but just for now, who is Clyde Osborne, and how did Austin know him? Were they friends? Did they go to school together? Was he older? How did the two know each other?
Austin met him when he was I want to say 14, 15 years old. Like I told you before, I let Austin become dependent instead of, independent. I started letting him, instead of traveling to powwows with his mom or his, with me or his grandmother or his aunties, I started letting him go with his cousin Candy, his cousin brother Winston. I started letting him go with other people, but people that I knew, and I always thought that his cousin Candy was a good influence to him, because she was, to me, I see her as a traditional person, and she knew traditional ways. And that's how he got to hang around her, and that's how Clyde came in the picture. That's how he got to know Clyde. She's related to Clyde. Austin is related to Candy. And so we just all knew each other as cousins, aunties, uncles, So he was almost like a brother to Austin.
And in age, is Clyde, was he the same age as Austin? Was he a few years older?
I do believe he was 3 or 4 years older than Austin.
Okay. All right. And did you get to know, of Austin got to know Clyde at 14, 15 years old? At the time, did you get to know Clyde fairly well?
No, I really didn't know Clyde. I knew of him.
Okay.
I knew his mom. I knew what family he came from, but not personally. No, I never really got to know him.
Okay.
Until Austin started bringing him over. Hey, Mom, this is Clyde. Da 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 da.
Would you say that he and Clyde did a and we're going to talk about Clyde's background eventually, and it's not a pretty one, but would you say Austin and Clyde hung out a lot? Let's say 2015, 2016, they were close. Did they grow apart? How would you explain it?
Over the summertime, they probably got closer as friends. Mm-hmm. But, they didn't go to school or anything together, so when he would go to school, I would make sure that he would go to school and not, take off over there to his cousin Candy's house. But he would travel with her on the weekends if they were going to powwows and stuff like that.
Okay.
So, and what he did on the weekend when he was there, I entrusted her with him, but I really didn't know what was going on over there or who was all over there at their residence. So he might have been over there for all I knew,
Okay. And we're going to talk about Candy. Candy's going to come up later as well. Now, there's another guy we need to talk about. His name is Ambrose, and you're going to have to pronounce and spell his last name just so we get it right, because I know in our previous conversation, I think I misunderstood his last name. So why don't you give his last name and how to spell it?
Okay, his name is Ambrose Watomy, Wahtomy.
Okay, thank you. Now, I got the idea that maybe Austin didn't know him as well, but Clyde and Ambrose did know each other. How did Austin know Ambrose?
Ambrose is an older gentleman. I'm thinking he's older than Clyde. I know that. Mm-hmm. They know each other through ceremonies, powwows, because Ambrose still does sing, sing on the, in the powwows and stuff like that. And but I wouldn't say they were, know each other close or, personally. Just knows him in general.
Okay. Did Clyde and Ambrose both live on the reservation where you and Austin lived?
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, I think they just live right down the road from each other. Clyde lived on one road, and then right down the road, that's where at a T almost. That's where Ambrose, his family lives. They were closely grew up in the same area.
Okay. So let's move up now to the day before Austin disappeared. And what went on, in those few days before he disappeared, anything that you look back at now, before the day, maybe going back to late January, early February, anything that really, sticks out to you that you might have been worried? Did Austin tell you anything that you were worried about regarding your son?
I really don't. I honestly don't.
Okay.
Never thought of, when I look back on it, there was nothing showing me red flags, something that I should be worried about,
Mm-hmm.
It just seemed like that he was starting to, like I said, live his life and wanted to move on to the next stage of his life,
Okay.
I knew that he still drank,
Well, he's 23. He's allowed to do that.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. I didn't have,
Mm-hmm.
It just seemed like any normal, I didn't, like I said, I didn't see no red flags.
Okay. That's perfectly fine, Susan. That's what a lot of people say to that question when I ask them, and that's very common. So the night before, there was a ceremony. Maybe you need to explain to the listeners what exactly it was.
That night, the previous night before, it was Friday night.
Yes, February 2nd.
Yeah. Um, what they do is he was at a ceremony where we call it the warm dance. And prior to the actual ceremony, they have like singing practices where they practice every Friday night. You know, they sing. People come over and they pray, and they pray for to have a good ceremony and that things will go right. You know, and my son's been going to these ceremonies, going to the singing practice way back when he was like 14, 15 years old. You know, even before that, my dad, we would all go, we would all participate, you know, and that's how he grew up. He grew up doing these ceremonies, participating, singing, dancing, and that's how my son grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it was a normal, you know, it was a norm. You know, go ahead, son. You know, he would, before he had a car, and he would go over there. He would go over there himself. You know, it was nothing for me to worry about. You know, I never worried about him going over there and or any harm or anything like that. You know, because the people that would go over there were older people, were people in their 50s and 60s. You know, they were the older generation people that our elders, is what we call them, would go and, you know, would start the ceremonies, you know. So I had no worry of him getting into a confrontation of what happened that night.
Okay, so this ceremony, it's a very common thing. Pretty common.
Yeah,
A lot of people go.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's only a one-time ceremony in how do I put this? In January, the first Fridays, the first three or four Fridays in January, and then the first weekend in February would be going into the actual ceremony. So there is like a preparation into the real ceremony. I guess I put it like that.
Okay.
Actual ceremony.
And how many people usually attend this ceremony that was on February 2nd? How many people went?
Usually about maybe 10 to 15 people. That, you know, and the majority of these people are family they're our family members.
Okay.
You know, one family puts on the ceremony and other people come, which were, you know, related to relations, you know.
Mm-hmm. But something happened there, and I need the listeners to understand that you didn't find out. You did not go to the ceremony. Austin was there, but you didn't find this out till the next morning. Actually, I think while you were taking him to work the next morning. But there was an incident there, and this is the reason that I brought up Clyde and Ambrose's name. What did Austin tell you about what happened the night before after this ceremony?
That Friday night I went to go pick up Austin. He called me about 10 o'clock, somewhere around there. He asked me, he goes, "Hey Mom, where are you at? I'm ready. I'm done. Can you come pick me up?" And I said, "Sure. Give me a second." You know, I was at the casino. But, you know, like I said, I had no worries. Mm-hmm. You know, I knew that he was fine where he was. So I went and picked him up. It was coming to 10 o'clock. And, you know, he came out, got in the car, and he goes, "Come on, let's go. You know, he was like kind of like anxious to get out of there, you know. And then he goes, "Hey, let's go over here." You know, we went down to the gas station. You know, he didn't say too much. You know, he just he was quiet, but he really didn't say too much.
Okay.
So when we got back, you know, we got some pop, and then we came home. We were sitting around. I was up till about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, just watching TV. And I told him finally, I'm going to go to bed. And he had, prior to that, he had left, because he knows some neighbors. He has a neighbor kid up here that he goes and visits sometime. And then I guess he had talked to somebody, I guess, and this young girl. Well, anyway, while I was asleep, and this young girl, I could hear this young girl in his room, and so I guess he had invited her in, even though he let her crawl through the window.
She didn't come through the front door. She came in through his bedroom window.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you know this girl?
No, I don't know her.
Mm-hmm.
I only found out later who she was. I really didn't get her first name because I guess she had bring over some alcohol and they had left their cans in the room, and I had instead of throwing them away, I just left them there.
Mm-hmm.
Usually I just when I go to clean the room, I take out all the garbage and stuff. But that time I just left them there, and I didn't bother with them.
Okay, so she came over. Do you believe this is a common occurrence?
With his girlfriends, or with young ladies?
Would you say that it was common for a girl to come out? I'm not here to get too deep into his personal life unless it has something to do with his disappearance, but would you say that it was common for girls to come over and come in through the window to visit him?
Yes, if he didn't want me to know who they were.
Okay. All right. Okay, so that's a yes. Okay, that's fine. And okay, I'm just trying to establish if this was something odd or not. So she came in. Do you believe that she stayed the night, or did she leave like a couple hours later? What do you think?
I think she left a few hours later because when I woke up, I didn't see no car outside. I didn't hear nothing.
Okay, so he goes to this ceremony, and we still haven't talked about the incident that happened after that because he didn't tell you about it until the next morning. But he gets home, he goes up to see if somebody down the street. He comes back, this girl comes over, she leaves. And then the next morning, though, he has to go to work, and you drive him to work. And what does he tell you while you're driving him to work?
He wakes he wakes me up about 7:30, and he's like, "Come on, Mom, I need to get to work. And I'm like, freaking early in the morning, And he's like, "All right." So I take him to where his boss lives. Before he goes, "Mom, can I just borrow your phone? I want to get on Messenger." I don't know who he's messaging. That's his business, not mine. He don't really talk to me all on the way over, which is sometimes normal because I don't, if he wants to talk to me, he'll talk to me. If I don't want to, anyway, we get going down the road, and right before we get to his boss's place, we get turned into his driveway, and then he looks at me and he goes, "Hey, Mom, I'm just going to let you know that, hey, Clyde pulled a knife out on me last night." And I looked at him and I was like, "What? You serious?" I go, "What's wrong with you guys?" I was upset at both of them, not Clyde, but, I'm like, why did he do that? He's like, "I don't know." I'm like, I was trying to get it out of him, but he wouldn't say anything. He was like, I just looked at him like, why does this happen?
Yeah.
You guys are like brothers. And he goes, he wouldn't say anything to me about why Clyde had pulled a knife out on him.
Mm-hmm. Did he also say that Ambrose was with Clyde?
No, he didn't tell me that Ambrose.
Okay.
He just said Clyde specifically.
Okay,
later on.
Okay, so at the time when you were driving him to work, and this is the day that he disappeared, when he did tell you this, he just said Clyde. He didn't say any other names.
Yeah.
Okay,
But
and And just to be clear, before he got out of the car that day, he never did give you an explanation. We'll get into what that might have been a little later, but at that time, he never gave you an explanation on why that happened.
No.
Okay.
He didn't.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, that just must have, like you said, you were angry, kind of maybe a little upset with Austin. Hey, you're supposed to be friends. What the heck's going on? Was that kind of your attitude?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of like why, because I asked him, I said, why are you guys fighting anyway? You know, why, why? Because to me, they were like brothers, like.
Right.
If one gets in trouble, they both get in trouble, whether it be from me or whether it be from somebody else, family-wise, they're just exactly like brothers, One does something wrong, they're both getting in trouble, and that's just, that's how I treated them both,
Would you say that when Austin brought that up, that he seemed worried about it? Did he seem fearful? Did it seem like he thought it might happen again? What do you think?
He seemed angry.
Seemed angry. Okay.
He seemed angry to me because that, like, how could my brother do that to me? My friend, how, I don't know. And what was strange to me was, why did Clyde go to the ceremony? Clyde's never gone to any kind of ceremony of such sort. He's not that kind of a person. He's not the kind of person to go to a powwow and sit there for the whole thing. He doesn't go to ceremonies. He's never gone to the warm dance ceremony. He's never gone to a Sundance ceremony. He's never participated in either one of them two, or a powwow. And that was kind of strange to me. Later on when I started thinking about things,
right?
Like, why did he even go?
Do you think that the only reason he was there was to confront Austin because he knew Austin would be there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So you're driving him, you have this conversation, but then you finally get to so you have this conversation, you're worried, and I'm sure you're thinking you're gonna talk to Austin about this later today when he gets home from work, and maybe even try to see, figure out what Clyde was thinking, etc. But Austin gets out of the car at the guy he was working for, and what is this guy's name?
His name is Blandon Kobe.
Okay. How do you spell that last name, if you could?
Kobe. C-O-B-Y.
C-O-B-Y. Okay, thank you. So Austin gets out, and you actually see him go up to Blandon's house. You saw him go inside.
Yeah. I wait. I don't know, my mom's always told me, whenever you drop a person off, make sure that they get in the house, because you don't want them standing outside. What if nobody's home? You got to make sure that they get inside the house and that they're okay, and then you can go ahead and leave. So I waited for him to go inside the house,
And so it was like any other day that you've ever dropped Austin off there.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just a normal day.
Okay. And so later that day, when did you start thinking that something might not be right? Because that is the last time that you saw Austin, and we'll talk about a little bit what might have transpired after you dropped him off. But later that day, when did it start? You start thinking, something's not right.
It probably wasn't until the next day, the next afternoon, because he would stay with that guy. He would stay with his employer. His employer had a place where his workers can stay.
All right.
like a separate room, like a board, it was like I want to say a boarding house, but not quite a boarding house. But his workers would stay over, stay the night or 2 nights, whatever. If he needed them directly to go to work in the next morning, they'd be able to stay there, And Austin even had a bag of clothes in case he, would spend the night and then he would go to work the next day.
Okay.
I knew that. So it was nothing out of the normal for me to not think that,
Okay.
But later on the next day, toward the afternoon, late afternoon, evening time, I was like, well, where's he at? How come he's not calling? How come he didn't, message me? Hey, Mom, I'm over here. Or Mom, I'm, at work, or hey, can you come pick me up later?
Mm-hmm.
So I started texting his brother. First person I texted was his brother, my older son.
Mm-hmm.
I asked him, I said, hey, have you seen your brother around? And he said, no. So I started texting my other family, my sisters, his cousins.
Did you try calling Austin? Austin had a phone with him, a cell phone?
No, he had Messenger. And I would,
Okay.
he had a phone, but it didn't work, or it didn't have minutes on there.
Okay.
It was a prepaid phone. So I would message his Messenger, hoping that he would
see it somewhere.
Use somebody else's phone to connect to his own Messenger.
Okay.
All right, so you tried calling or texting one of your sons. He hadn't seen him. You tried some other people. Did anybody in the process when you were doing this, did they ever call you and say, hey, I've been trying to track Austin down and he's not responding, anything like that?
No.
No? Okay.
They just, everybody that I talked to, they just, no, I haven't seen him, or I seen him like 2 days ago or 3 days ago, or,
Okay. Did you end up at some point calling his employer, this Blandon guy, who, of course, you already knew? What did you try calling him or texting him, and did he have anything to say about Austin?
I tried calling him, but I got no answer, so I just said, I would leave a brief message like, hey, this is Austin's mom, can you call me? And I still get no answer back from him, so I text him and I said, hey, this is Austin's mom. Can you know where he's at? I haven't seen or heard from him in a few days. He goes, yeah, he was here, but he left. And I go, what day was that? And he goes, that was that Saturday. And I was like, and you haven't seen or heard from him since then? This was like the 4th of February 4th and the 5th. No, the 4th I called him, the 5th was when I finally got a hold of him.
Okay, so that would have been a Monday.
Yeah.
Okay. And are we to understand, and we had talked about this, when you finally did talk to his employer, did he give you the impression that day that you drove off to Austin to work, that there was no work that day? What happened?
He didn't tell me direct. He
didn't tell you that.
Hold of him. He didn't. No, I didn't know that he didn't have work that day. No.
Okay.
And so the employer, the guy you talked to on Monday, who is Austin's boss, he never told you that.
He told me then that Monday when I finally got a hold of him that there was no work, and that he just used a phone and made a phone call and then he left.
Okay. Why wasn't there any work on that Saturday? So Friday night was the ceremony. Saturday is when you drove Austin to work. You tried calling his employer on Sunday when you got worried in the afternoon, but you didn't talk to him till that Monday. Did the employer explain to you why there was no work on that Saturday?
No, he didn't explain to me. I didn't find out till later on after I had talked to the detectives.
Okay. All right. We will talk. Okay. So I just wanted to make that clear. So
So you talked to the employer on Monday. He told you that Austin, yes, of course, did go to work on Saturday. You saw Austin go inside. But after the employer told you that story, when was it that you finally decided, you know what? I think I'm going to have to call this into police. I just have a bad feeling about this.
It was like about 3 months, 2.5 months, 3 months later.
Okay. And if you could, and I know that seems, I'm going to say, that may seem like a longer time than maybe other people might wait, but as I was telling you off the air, that I've had some cases where people didn't file police reports for 8 or 9 months. Why did it take in this particular case for you to wait 2.5, 3 months?
I had, I called. I talked to my family, to see if anybody knew or seen him, where he was. I called the police, the jails. I called the jails. I called the hospitals. The homeless shelters. I kept messaging him. I put it on Facebook. Hey son, where you at? Call me. Let your mom know where you're at. I just, my older son would go look around at the bars and stuff like that, and we'd just always be on the lookout. But what kind of deteriorated me from going to do a police report was I had talked to a tribal officer. And I knew this tribal officer, I asked him, I said, hey, what do you guys do when a person is missing? And he told me, well, there's not really much we can do. All we can do is give me his name or give me their name, the place where they live, and we'll just do a welfare check. And I was like, are you serious? In my mind, I was thinking, are you serious? This is all you guys can do is just do a welfare check? And I go, what if this person's living with you? And that this person is not around, or they're not here physically. And they go, well, I'll, just give me the name, address, and we'll go see. And I'm like, I was kind of pissed, I was mad.
Of course.
This is a tribal officer telling me these things, and I'm like, you guys are just, sorry, but you guys are just full of shit. If you're going to tell me this and this is all that you could do for me, why go to you guys then? Why go to some kind of law enforcement, to report him missing?
And so you explained to this guy, hey, my son, I dropped him off at work. His boss said he made a phone call and then he just walked off. And this tribal police officer couldn't seem less interested.
Exactly.
Okay. All right, so that's one of the reasons it's caused you just got had such a bad experience with this guy that it says, why even bother to file a police report if this is how they're going to handle it? They're just going to blow it off.
Like,
okay.
I didn't care. No feelings, no. Yeah.
We hear about that a lot on Unfound. So that is, unfortunately, that guy's reaction is not unusual. Not in the world that I live in with Unfound. So over those, the next month, you talk to his friends. Nobody says that they saw him. Nothing like that.
Yeah, I've had.
Okay.
I've had his friends would come over, and they would, or I'd see them where I work in a public place, and when I would see them, I would just ask them, hey, have you guys seen him? Have you seen my son? They would say, no, I haven't seen him since end of December or the beginning of December or last, that's the last time they seen him, they would come and ask me, hey, where's your son at? Where's Austin at? And then I tell them I don't know. Then a few of them would say, okay, well, I'm going to go look for him. When I find him, I'll let you know. I'll tell him to call you, or vice versa. I would tell him to call me.
So Austin goes to work, disappears. You talk to his employer. You find out that and we're going to talk about that once again here in a moment, that there wasn't any work for that day, allegedly, and Austin made a phone call. We're going to talk about the phone call, and he took off. You tried to file a police report, but you got such a bad experience with a tribal officer that you said the heck with that. And so you tried to call around and do your own little bit of investigation, but nobody, to your knowledge, or who would admit it, saw Austin at all.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, all right. So we're to believe that the way it's all explained is that Austin goes to his boss's house, makes a phone call, walks off, nobody sees him again.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, now we're going to move on to some other things now. I do have to ask you something because we're going to talk about them in a second. Being that this happened, and you know the story that Austin told you right before he got out of the car, was it in your mind that possibly Clyde could have had something to do? Did that enter? I'm not saying he did it. We are not saying that. But did that enter your mind when you started figuring out that Austin was missing for a few days? Did that cross your mind?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
No.
Okay. Once again, we're not saying that Clyde did anything. We're not doing that. But I'm just wondering, being that Austin told you that right before you got out of the car, I'm going to guess that was a statement that probably to this day rings very loud in your mind.
Yes, it does.
Okay. Okay.
It had a sound effect on me. Let's put it that way.
Okay. So, given that, and this is where we're going to get into these details a little. We've gone over the generalities now. We're going to get deep into the details. Clyde actually came over to your house, not a few days after the last day that Austin was seen. Why don't you tell the listeners about what went on? You didn't have to track him down. He actually came to your house. Please explain that.
It was about, I want to say about 10:30, between 10:30 and 11. And I usually don't open the door for nobody, but I at that late hour I don't open up the door for nobody.
Okay.
I seen who it was, so when I opened the door, I put my foot behind the door so that he wouldn't, come in through the whole door. But
okay.
He acted like he didn't want to come through the door. Clyde was standing at the doorway, at my door. And so I opened the door for him, and I put my foot behind the door so that, he wouldn't totally come in through the door.
Sure. You were, given that Austin told you that just a few days before that, you were a little worried.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when he, I was expecting, hey, where's Austin at? Hey, have you seen Austin?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know where Austin's at? These are always questions that he asks me every time he sees me. Way before, these were questions he would ask me. Hey, where's my brother? Hey, where's my brother at? You got a phone number? How can I reach him? Where's he at? He's always wanted to know where he was. But this night, I don't know the individual that he was with that was in his vehicle. I could only see what he looked like. But his expression when he came up to the door, his facial expression, his demeanor was, hey, how are you doing? Are you okay? And I just looked at him like, and I didn't ask him, why are you asking me these questions? I didn't ask that. I was by myself in my apartment.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to make him angry or have a confrontation with him.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at him and I just asked him, I says, what do you want? And then he said, oh, I just come over to borrow a computer cord. He goes, do you have a computer cord that I could borrow? And I looked at him and I said, no, I don't have one. And I asked him, is that all you want? And he was like, yeah. I said, okay, well, bye. And I closed the door and locked it. And I made sure that he left.
So Austin's name never came up in that conversation.
No.
He never said, I heard that Austin's missing. Just wondering what's going on and wondering how you're handling it. Austin's name never came up.
Never once in that.
Okay.
To me, what felt like 15, 20 minutes was probably only like 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay. Maybe even, well, if that was what the conversation was, I guess it would have been less than that. Did you, of course, what you're saying is you never did ask Clyde about the knife incident that Austin told you about?
No.
Okay.
I don't want to make him mad.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
I don't know whether it's me trying to make him mad. I don't want to make him mad.
Of course not.
I would probably, I run these scenarios through my head.
Mm-hmm.
What if when and if ever I ever see him, but it's always in the public, and I don't want to make a public scene. I don't want to get into an argument. I don't want to be confronted. What if I do something to him that's going to cause me to go to jail?
Right.
I probably would,
Okay.
But now that was then, that was back then. But now I don't. I just look at him, and he looks at me like, he's waiting for me to ask questions. I could see it, and he's afraid to talk to me.
Well, how many times since that night, so 3 or 4 days after Austin disappeared, has Clyde ever come over to your house since?
Never. That was the last time I've ever.
Okay. And have you had any conversations with him since that night, even if it was just 3 or 4 words?
Just once.
Okay.
He came up to me while I was at my place of work, and he's come up to me and he says, hey, I've heard some things about Austin that I think you should know.
Mm-hmm.
And I told him, I said, don't talk to me. You take it to the police. You take it to the detective and you tell him.
Okay.
And that was the only time that I've ever talked to him.
Okay. All right. We will talk again about Clyde once again a little later, but we just want to try to keep this in the timeline that he never explained why he came over to your house. We can take for granted that it was because he heard about Austin's disappearance, but he never explicitly said that.
Correct.
Okay. Let's move on to this, and this goes back to the phone call that Austin made. When did you end up talking to one of Austin's coworkers?
I didn't directly talk to him. What I was told was through the detective.
Okay.
The detective, because I would after I had filed a report.
Okay.
And I let him know, and then after he supposedly done his investigations, whatnot, then he came and told me, or I had to call him to ask for information.
Okay. So we'll remember that. So what did this coworker, he was there allegedly that morning when Austin was there, and what did this coworker say?
Like I said, it come from the detective.
Okay.
I was told that Austin went in and he was asking if there was any work. The coworker told the detective that there was no work that day because the boss was still passed out from the night before because they had been drinking.
Okay.
So Austin had used the telephone, or not telephone, but had used somebody's cell phone. I don't know whose cell phone, whether it be the boss's or whether it be his, but used a phone to make a phone call, and then he left.
He left. And this is what that coworker said.
Yes.
Okay. And we have to remember that Blandon, who you talked to a couple days after Austin disappeared, did Blandon ever admit that he was too drunk, that there was no work that day? Did he ever tell you that when you talked to him?
No.
Okay. But on the other hand, it seems that the boss's statement about how Austin made a phone call and how the coworker said that Austin made a phone call, those stories seem to go with each other. That maybe is the truth.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. But you still to this day, though, don't know whose phone Austin used.
No.
Okay. Okay. Do you have any idea, has the detective or anybody else given you an idea how many people were even there that morning when Austin showed up? So we know the boss was there. Sounds like he was passed out, though. We have this coworker. Any other coworkers there, to your knowledge?
Just as far as I know, there was just those two and Austin there.
Okay. So, all right. So, Austin had to have used either the boss's phone or the coworker's phone, but neither of them have ever told you who Austin called, even though Austin used one of their phones.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Okay. But since then, have you ever has the coworker continued to be helpful like that, or has he kind of avoiding talking about it now? How would you portray that?
To me, it seems like he just faded himself out of the picture.
Did he?
Like he don't want to, be questioned, or he don't want nothing to do with it. That's just my opinion, my feelings, my thoughts.
Okay. And you know who this coworker is? We're not going to use his name, but do you know who he is?
I've seen him a few times before.
Mm-hmm.
He's come over to my apartment. He's even slept outside of my apartment in his car because he was homeless. And I've told my son, I says, if he's going to sleep out there, then at least let me know that that's him out there, so I won't be calling the cops thinking that there's some homeless man outside sleeping in the car in my parking area,
Yeah.
And my son goes, okay, I'll make sure to tell you, Mom. And that's how he would catch a ride to work sometimes was with this guy, and I never really met him directly. I've just, seen his face, and he seemed like a nice guy, but he, like I said, he was homeless. He
did in Austin working there. Did this guy's name ever come up with you when you talked to Austin about his work? Did Austin ever say anything about this coworker guy?
Just in jokingly manners about how funny he was, and like how some of the stupid things that this guy would do. Nothing red flags or nothing out of the ordinary. Like, oh yeah, he did this or he did that. No, it was more of a friendly, jokingly manner. The stupid things that he would do, or he could have done it this way, or he could have done it that way, but instead he did it this way.
Okay. So it didn't sound like didn't sound like Austin had any beefs with this guy.
No.
Okay. Now, this is something that I was thinking about, being that Austin didn't have his own phone and he had to use some other phone, and he called somebody, which to me means that whatever number he called, it was either in the phone that he used or he knew somebody's number off the top of his head. How many numbers do you think that Austin knew off the top of his head of people to call, and who would those people have been?
I could only 3 for sure, 3 numbers for sure,
Okay.
and 1 is a possibility.
Okay, give it your opinion. Whose numbers would he have known off the top of his head?
My personal cell phone number, my work number, his grandmother's number, and his cousin Candy's number.
All right, and Candy is somebody that we mentioned early on who had some connections to Clyde. Okay. All right.
Correct.
So I want the listeners to remember that, because that's going to pop up later. I think this is actually a very important part of this case. I got to tell you, and this came up. This situation came up in another disappearance I covered recently, where it was also trying to figure out the numbers that a person would know off the top of their head, because we today in the 21st century with our cell phones, we don't know anybody's phone number. We just hit the button on our phone. I know my dad's phone number, but don't ask me to name anybody else's phone number because I don't know it. So I'm going to guess that Austin was very much the same way. So it's interesting that he would just take somebody's phone and dial a number. It means that that number must have been very important to him. All right, so I just want the listeners to point that out. So you eventually, 3 months later, you did file this police report. It sounds like you had some interactions with the detective. He told you what this coworker said. However, we do have to remember that the FBI does sometimes get involved in these cases, and was there some sort of discrepancy about the FBI being involved or not?
Yes and no. I want to say yes and no.
Okay, please explain.
The time had went on, in the investigation, and in my family, and my nephew in particular, he wanted to know what was going on. He wanted to know, details. He wanted to know what the detectives knew. So he took it upon himself to call to the we call it the Justice Center. It's called the Justice Center here in Fort Hall. He called the Justice Center, talked to the head detective. The head detective told him, yes, the FBI is involved, and they're doing what they can do. And he went back and he told his mom. His mom told me that, yes, the FBI is involved, and I'm thinking that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. It's a good thing that they're involved, because they're going to get somewhere. They're going to do something about it. Something's going to happen. Somebody's going to be brought in. Somebody's going to be questioned. These were things that were going through my head that, I'm thinking, good, we're going to find him. Questions are going to be answered. People are going to be brought in. All of these things were going through my head until it probably had to be about maybe 2 months later. I come to find out when I was talking to the detective, the FBI was never involved.
Mm-hmm.
And that the detective told me that the FBI won't be involved until a year later, after his anniversary date of him being missing for a year. Mm-hmm. Of my son Austin being missing for a year.
Mm-hmm.
So I waited a year, and a few days after, February 3rd, 2019, I went and called the detectives, and I asked them, okay, well, it's been a year now. Is the FBI going to be involved? And he told me that the FBI told him that they don't involve themselves in missing people.
Well, that's just not true. That's just not true. I mean, I know that I've covered, I realize that maybe FBI is reluctant to get involved in many disappearances. They do obviously get involved in disappearance involving children. especially if they think that they've been taken over state lines. But when it does involve, I know that my perception is that the FBI has much more involvement in law enforcement if it does involve Native Americans than it does other people. That's my perception. I mean, any comment on that? Is that why you thought that maybe the FBI would get involved?
Yes. That,
Mm-hmm.
I thought that they were,
Mm-hmm.
because I dropped him off on the reservation and to where my son is an enrolled member of a federally recognized tribe. I thought they would at least look into it.
Yes.
Talk to people.
Yes.
Bring people into question. And he was threatened with a knife.
Right. Right.
Nothing, in my mind, nothing ever became of it. They just swept it underneath the rug and started on with another, what they call a lead, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And didn't follow through with it.
Have you ever tried to contact the FBI yourself?
Not personally, no.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to say this right on the air. That's probably should be put on your to-do list. Okay? That's just an opinion. Okay? If this is because they're not involved, the year has passed and the FBI is not involved, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So there was a discrepancy there, and I certainly can understand why you would have been excited that they got involved, and I can also I'm sure the listeners can understand why you're very dejected when you found out that wasn't the case. Totally understandable. But I should tell you that in the disappearance that I've covered, 130 of them, the FBI is not involved very often. Okay? In fact, I can maybe think of 2 or 3 cases off the top of my head out of 130 where they've actually been involved. So on one hand, maybe it's kind of right, but on the other, given your Native American ethnicity, heritage, the way we handle those things in the United States, it does seem the FBI would be more likely to get involved. So, okay. Have the police ever asked anybody to do any lie detector tests? The boss, the coworker, Clyde, anybody else? Have they looked into anybody's phone records? Anything regarding any of that?
As far as I know about people taking lie detector tests, the only 2 that were taken was his boss, Blandon Kobe, and the coworker.
Okay. And how'd they do?
Apparently, they passed. That's what he said.
Okay.
He couldn't do They scheduled interviews and lie detector tests for Candy.
Mm-hmm.
And they did, and same way with Clyde, but they couldn't. The detective told me that the lie detector tests have to be scheduled because they come out of Pocatello, which is the next city over, that they have to come in on to the reservation to do the lie detector test. They just can't simply just come over and do it. They have to be a scheduled time.
Mm-hmm.
So every time they schedule a lie detector test for Candy to come take one, she doesn't show. She will say that she will show up. She doesn't show up. They go to her house. She doesn't open the door. She doesn't, return any of their phone calls. She just doesn't want to do it. Doesn't want to come in and do a statement either. She don't.
Okay. And we also have to remember, being that we just talked about this a few minutes ago, is that your cousin Candy, and we're going to talk a little bit about her in a second, a little deeper, but she is a person who you believe that Austin would have known her phone number off the top of his head.
Correct.
Okay, so there is the possibility that if Blandon and the coworker and the boss are telling the truth, if that is true, then it's a good possibility that Austin might have called her that morning.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And then maybe that's the reason she doesn't want to take a lie detector test. It's a possibility. I'm not here to necessarily theorize, but I think I just need to put some things together for the listeners to maybe understand this. Let's talk a little bit about Candy. Of course, she's been mentioned a few times now. How exactly is she your cousin?
She would be Austin's cousin.
Austin's cousin.
Her mom is my cousin, and we're related on their dad's side.
Wow.
So her dad, we're like blood cousins. We're close related.
Okay.
My dad and her grandpa are brothers.
Oh, okay.
That's closely related.
Okay.
So that's why I never really had any reason for my son not to go over there.
Of course.
Not to hang around her, not to be with the family, because that's family.
Mm-hmm. And you said earlier in this conversation that Candy was one of the people that Austin used to go with when he would do these dance competitions outside of the area.
Yes.
Okay, and Candy is the one. And Candy is the one who knew Clyde.
Yes.
Okay. All right. How far does Candy live from where Austin went to work that morning?
I would say about a good block and a half.
That's it?
Yeah.
That's it.
No. Wait. What do you? I'm sorry. Maybe I'm thinking a block is like a big square block, but it's probably more than that, because where they work and where she lives is like a field, so that may be more, maybe about 2 or 3 blocks.
All right. So would you say a mile? A mile? Half mile?
Yeah, about a mile.
Okay, so not far. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have to maybe consider that he could have walked there. Now, something else though is that could have Candy been a witness to Clyde pulling this knife on Austin that night before? Could she have been there? Do you think?
She was the one that told me that Clyde had pulled a knife out. A few days later, after the incident and after Austin had gone missing, she was the one that told me that Clyde, and this is where Ambrose comes in the picture.
Okay,
Clyde
please.
and Ambrose were outside. Clyde was the one that pulled a knife out on Austin, had a knife out on Austin, and they were, he was getting mad at him. And when she went outside, she seen them and she told Clyde, "What are you doing? Why are you doing that? You shouldn't be doing that." So she actually seen it.
Okay.
That Clyde had done that to my son.
Okay, so Austin told you first the next morning, and then a few days later, when you're still trying to figure out where Austin is, and of course we're trying to figure out this today, but this is after you talked to his boss in those early days, that you talked to Candy, and she also talked about Clyde pulling the knife.
Yes.
Okay.
And then that's how I found out that Ambrose was there.
Okay. And did Candy ever explain to you why Clyde did that?
No, she never did. Never offered or said anything why he did what he did.
Did she ever explain how Austin got away from Clyde? Because it doesn't seem like Austin told you that. Was this just something that he walked away and Clyde didn't want to follow him? How did Candy ever explain that?
No, she never explained. You know, she just kind of like just. It sounded to me like she just kind of wedged herself in between them and just made him leave.
Okay.
Made Clyde leave and told Austin to go back inside. That's the impression that I got, because this all happened outside of her residence while everybody was inside. Just them three were outside, and then she came outside.
Okay.
And seen what was going on, the confrontation.
Okay. What is your, before this ever happened, before Austin disappeared and everything, what was your general opinion on Candy? Were you close? Was she shady? Anything like that? How would you explain her to the listeners?
Way back, a long time ago, I always thought that she was a good person because she come from a good family. Her upbringings were traditional. She had a traditional upbringing. You know, I seen her as a good person. But later on, as my son got older, I could see that she wasn't a very good person. Okay. And I tried to explain to my son, maybe you need to start staying away from her. Maybe you shouldn't be going over there. Maybe because, I seen him start doing, smoking marijuana. He started drinking. He started going over there more often than he should be, and then right before he had gone missing, I found out that she was doing other drugs.
Okay.
I found out that she was dealing. She was smoking or doing meth, and she was doing smoking marijuana. I mean, not doing, but smoking.
Okay.
And
all right.
And
but here's
my impression of her,
please,
was not very good after that.
Say that again, please.
Oh, my impression of her after that, after I had found out that she was doing all these things, were not very good. I didn't think highly of her anymore.
Okay.
And
well, here's the point that sticks out to me. You did ask her to try to help go out and search for Austin, and what did she say?
She asked me for gas money. She asked me, "Oh, well, do you have $10? So do you have $10 I could put in gas so I can go look for him?" She goes, "I think he might be over here at so-and-so's house, or his other friend lives here in Townsite. I know where he stays. Maybe he might be over there." So, she kept asking me for gas money. So, of course I would give her gas money to go look for my son because, to me, I thought anything would help.
Of course.
But I didn't realize that, maybe she was just using me for money when maybe she knew all along where he was or what happened.
Okay. Well, just so you know, Susan, I mean, I've covered 130 disappearance cases, and this is the first one where I think anybody, person has been asked to help, and they say, "Well, you going to give me gas money?" That is the first time, I'm pretty sure, in 130 cases. It's pretty unusual. Okay. So I think that you maybe, and I think that it's unusual. It's not like you were asking her to fly across the United States and expect her to pay for it to do a search. You're just asking her to go out into the neighborhood, like in a square mile or something, and just try to help out, and she wants money for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
She did.
Okay.
She got it.
Okay. You did give her the money?
Yes, I did. I gave her money to go.
Okay. Was she helpful?
Supposedly, she went to go look for my son. I don't know if she really did or not.
Okay.
But she got money from me, though.
Okay. Now, let's move on to this. Now, she is not the only one who lived close, what we would typify as close, a block, 2 blocks, less than a mile from where Austin was working. You told me that there are a variety of family members who live right in that area where Austin went to work, and of course none of them saw Austin walking anywhere, did they?
No, they didn't.
No, and we're not going to get into all the people's names and everything else. I'm just trying to make the listeners understand that Candy isn't the only one who knew, who lived close to the employee's place, their employer's place. There were other people, variety. I mean, you told me 2 or 3 people in your family have houses in that area.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know what to make of that. We're under the impression that he walked somewhere, but it doesn't seem that anybody saw him, not just family members, but anybody. So the listeners going to have to think about that. Now, there is another, you had mentioned early on that there was a girl that came over through the window, but we're going to talk about another young woman who... and I'm still trying to figure out, I'm still working on this, and maybe by the time that everybody hears our interview, I'll have more information. But there is a young woman who goes by the name on Facebook, let me try this again, MII space magic, MAJIK space story, STORII. Who is she?
She is a young lady that used to stay in the apartment complex where I used to stay. And I never really got to know her as a person. I just seen her. She lived around the corner and downstairs to the right of where I stay. And how my son got to know her, I have no idea. Maybe when he went to school in American Falls, maybe because that's where her family comes from, lives. Maybe that's how he knew her. Maybe there was some kind of people that in common.
Okay.
That's how he got to know her.
All right.
I don't know.
Do you think that they had some sort of relationship or anything like that?
He said it was nothing serious. You know, okay. I never went to her apartment. He would just tell me, "Hey, Mom, I'm going to go downstairs." So when he meant downstairs, I knew where he was going. He was going to that young lady's house or a young lady's apartment. And he would stay there for 2 or 3 days. He'd come back up, shower, change, whatever, do his business, what he's got to do here, go wherever he needs to go. And then he'd come home and then he'd, go down there and visit her as well. But it wasn't like I'm moving into her apartment, I'm with her. It wasn't that kind of a relationship.
In what time frame was this, Susan?
I would like to say that summer of 2017.
Okay. All right. And the reason we're bringing her up is because there was at least a rumor, and we don't do many rumors, but I think we do have to talk about it, is did you find out that maybe one of her ex-boyfriends had been murdered or something like that? What was the story?
Yes, I was told by the detective that she may have had a part in one of her ex boyfriends being murdered.
Huh.
And she was a person of interest to the detective. And that's why he wanted to talk to her. He wanted to find her and talk to her himself.
Okay, but the problem is what? Why can't he find her?
Because she's in hiding, because she has federal warrants out for her.
Okay.
And that as of I know, that's what he's told me. That's why she's nowhere to be found. She's hiding somewhere.
Okay. Do you remember, do you know if the detective, whoever you talked to, ever told you her real name?
No,
Okay.
I don't remember him
Okay.
saying anything. I just know what she looks like.
Right. And the listeners, I'm sure, are going to go to her Facebook page and find out what she looks like. But something I'm trying to do, listeners should know, the thing I'm trying to do is trying to figure out what her real name is, and we're not going to say publicly how we're going about doing that. But that's something, Susan, I could tell you that I'm still working on, that hopefully I will have some answers for you shortly. So
I would just say she's very distinct looking.
yes, she is, and we'll just leave it at that. The listeners can go find that out for themselves. But once again, her Facebook account is MII space MAJIK space STORII. All right, and then they can see it for themselves. But we don't know her real name, but I'm trying to figure that out. And Susan knows the ways we're trying to do that. But we're talking about it because of what this detective told you. We don't entertain rumors on here, but if a policeman's going to talk about it, then we have to talk about it. Okay. So maybe Austin ran into her that morning. We just don't know. Okay. Let's go back to Clyde Osborne. Of course, we know about the knife story. We know he came over to your house a few days later. But you told me we still aren't not sure why he would ever pull a knife on Austin in the first place. However, you did tell me a story about Austin coming to somebody's defense. When did this happen? How did you find out about it?
This was, I remember now. It was during his birthday. His birthday happened to be on the 17th of December. And for a Christmas present, I had went and bought him a phone, one of those track phones, and I bought him a card at Walmart. I happened to be thinking about this last night.
Okay.
And I remember because it was his birthday. It was his birthday. It was in December of 2017. And we went on to Walmart, and I purchased him a phone because he didn't have one. And then when we were going through the parking lot, and I didn't know this, but at that time he was using my phone to contact one of his friends on messengers, and he found out that he was there in the parking lot at Walmart. So we went through Walmart parking lot, and we found his friend, and his friend he got off, and who happened to be with Clyde. So they were all in the car together. They were waiting for another gentleman that was in Walmart. I left thinking that, okay, he's okay. No worries. I know who he's with. So I left. And then a few days later, Austin gets a hold of me, and he's like, hey, Mom, I'm over here at so-and-so's house. Can you come pick me up? And I was like, yeah, sure. Give me about half hour, 45 minutes, and I'll come pick you up. On the way home, he was telling me, he was like, hey, Mom, you remember that night you dropped me off with Clyde and the other gentleman? And I said, yeah, or my friend. He's like, yeah. And I said, he goes, he was sitting there picking on him. He was calling him all kinds of names. He was like hitting him. He was like punching him. He was just talking down to him. And, my friend didn't even do anything. He was just sitting there. He kept telling Clyde, quit doing that, quit bothering him. And just quit picking on him, basically. And then he goes, I just didn't like how he was acting, why Clyde was acting that way toward his so-called friend, that's supposed to be Clyde's friend as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so Austin stepped up to his defense and told him, just quit picking on him, leave him alone. I don't know why you're picking on him, because then he said that Clyde told him, well, if you don't like it, then both of you can get out. You guys can walk yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So they got out of the vehicle, and they walked over to McDonald's. Well, when they were at McDonald's, I come to find out that my cousin was over there. One of my older cousins was over there and happened to see Austin and his friend. and had given him a ride back to Fort Hall. How coincidence that was.
Right.
But yeah.
All right. So what you're saying is Clyde was picking on somebody in mid-December in this Walmart parking lot. Austin stuck up for this guy who was getting picked on and, stopped Clyde from doing this.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you know if Austin and Clyde had any interactions after that before this knife incident at the beginning of February? The whole, for example, the whole month of January, do you think that Austin and Clyde saw each other, talked to each other at all? Do you know anything about that?
I know that they seen each other. They hung around each other, but I have a video on my phone, and it's probably the last video I have of my son, where there's him, my son, Clyde, Candy, and Candy's husband, all at Candy's residence.
Mm-hmm.
This was a video that was taken. This was the last video that I seen of my son, but it was taken at the end of a little bit before Christmas, like 2 or 3 days before Christmas.
All right.
And it looked like in the video that they were getting along, I guess. Whatever they were doing over there, I have no idea.
Okay.
So
that was on Facebook or something like that?
No, it was a recording on my phone, because sometimes when my son wouldn't have a phone, he would take my phone.
All right. Oh, okay. So I think we need a little. We need a little explanation. So the way the video got on the phone is that Austin took the phone with him, used it to video himself and Clyde and Candy and her husband, and then you get the phone back and see the video on it.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. All right. So this would have been maybe just a few days after Austin stuck up for this guy, and it does seem that Clyde and Austin were getting along fine.
Yeah.
All right. But that doesn't change the fact that Austin told you that Clyde pulled a knife on him, and then Candy, if we're to believe her, she also said that she saw Clyde do this. And then we also have this Ambrose guy, but Austin, for some reason, did not mention Ambrose when he told you this story that morning of February 3rd. Was there? I should ask you this: was there any other people there to witness this knife incident? There was. So it seemingly was Candy, Austin, Ambrose, Clyde. Anybody else?
Nobody else that I'm aware of.
Okay. All right. Now, we need to talk about Clyde regarding this. He has a criminal record, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
All right. What is it for, and when did he go to jail? Why? What was the issue?
I do believe it was right after, around when he turned 18. He had gotten a young lady pregnant who was underage. She was a minor.
Mm-hmm.
And he had gone to prison for statutory rape. And I know he's been in and out of prison since then, because he can't stay out of trouble because of drinking and driving. And while he got out from prison, he would continue to break his probation, and then he would go back, come back, go back, come back.
Okay. I have it in my notes that he went to jail in 2011, and he spent 35 months in jail for the charges that you just talked about. And it doesn't surprise me then that since then he's been in and out of jail. That doesn't surprise me at all. Do you know if he ever had to register as a sex offender?
I have no idea.
No idea.
More likely, yes, but I don't know.
You don't know. Okay. Did you and Austin ever have a chance to talk about Clyde being in jail, going to jail? And I have to ask, being that you knew Austin and Clyde were hanging around each other, even though they got along, did that ever worry you, that he was hanging around with a convicted felon?
I did. We did have a conversation, probably when he was like 17 or 18, somewhere around there.
Mm-hmm.
I remember telling him that, why he went to prison and stuff like that. But Austin wasn't the kind of person to really hold a grudge,
Mm-hmm.
to like, oh, well, he did that, I'm going to stay away from him. I don't want nothing to do with him. He wasn't that type of a person. I guess he gave him a fair chance at knowing him and knowing the person that he is. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do.
But then when Clyde kept going in and out of prison, in and out of jail, that's when I stepped up and I told Austin, I said, maybe you better start thinking about not hanging around him anymore. He's not a very good person. You know that he's been in and out of prison already. This is his second time coming back from prison. He's not the same person as he was before. He's a different person. And he's like, yeah, I know, but he's still my cousin brother, But I told him, you just better start thinking about not hanging around him anymore.
Okay.
You might get in trouble. You might get in trouble for what he's doing or did, or the people that he's hanging around with.
Right. Okay.
We've had that conversation.
Okay.
But
to your knowledge,
totally up to him. I'm sorry, what?
To your knowledge, has Clyde, even through the grapevine, I know you've only had the one conversation when he came over, and then you maybe saw him one other time. To your knowledge, has he ever made a comment to anybody about what he thinks happened to Austin?
Not directly.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard a comment made from one of my nephew's girlfriends, her friend, who happened to be Clyde's girlfriend at that time.
Huh.
He told her, don't be hanging around his family, meaning Austin, or you're going to end up in the same place where he is. Or no. You can come up missing just like Austin. Yeah, that's how he said it.
Okay.
So, and then I want to say my niece, because she's with my nephew. And I told him, I said, well, why don't you guys go to the police with this? Why don't you tell her to go to the police? Why don't you, nothing ever came about of it. Nobody said anything.
Yeah. Okay. Not sure what to make of that. I hear a lot of stories like that, doing what I do. I'm not sure what to make of that. It doesn't necessarily mean Clyde had anything to do with the disappearance. We just don't know. Okay, but that still doesn't explain. If he ever had an opinion on what happened to, of course, maybe he should be considered a suspect, but we don't know if he ever said, well, I think Austin walked off. I think Austin did this. Nothing like that.
No.
Okay.
Nothing.
Okay.
He's never gave me an opinion.
Okay. Now here's, please.
He's come to my work a few times and asked my coworkers, how's Susan doing? Is she doing okay? How's she doing? I always thought that was strange of him to ask things like that to my coworkers, and they'd come and ask me, hey, you know what? Hey, Clyde was here, or hey, guess who's asking about you, and I'd be like, why? Why is, those why questions would pop in my head.
Okay.
He, at a few times, my older son, he would go to the bars, he would go to the bar and then he would see Clyde. Clyde would see him. Clyde would walk out. 2-3 hours later, Clyde would come back. He would be intoxicated. he'd go straight up to my son and say, I don't know why the police are questioning me. I had nothing to do with your brother's disappearance. I don't know anything about your brother. You know, where did it turn into your brother when it was, you know, they considered each other brothers? You know, and then my older son would say these things, and he would come back and he would tell us, and then those were red flags in my mind. Why would he be saying these things to him if he knew nothing of where my son was, or had anything to do with him, or, you know, those were just my thoughts anyway.
Mm-hmm. Do you know if have you ever been told what Clyde's alibi could be for the morning when Austin went to work?
No.
Okay. All right. Now here is something that I was very surprised that you told me, but we've talked about this Ambrose guy who seems like Clyde's right-hand man. To hear Candy said, of course, Austin did not say this, but Candy said that Ambrose was also there when Clyde pulled this knife on Austin that night, the night before Austin disappeared. Where is Ambrose now?
Ambrose is working with me at where I work.
So Ambrose works with you. I just want to make sure the listeners understand that. You work with Ambrose. I'm not saying you work side by side, but he is employed by the same company you are, under the same roof with you.
Correct.
And I have to ask how much interaction, because this is what I just have to do. How much interaction do you have with Ambrose?
Very little.
Very little. Okay.
But being in the position that I'm in, I have to interact with him.
Mm-hmm.
I have to acknowledge that he's there.
Mm-hmm.
I have to acknowledge the things he does wrong, the things he does right in my position.
Okay.
That I have with the company.
Okay. And you have never, though, in the last year and roughly 4 months, you've never asked him about Austin's disappearance?
No.
Okay.
Because I don't see him outside of the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any interactions with any of my employees outside of my workplace.
Okay. I would never ask you where you work or anything like that, but are the people above you in this company aware of your connection to Ambrose?
That goes back, okay. I'm going to have to kind of rewind a little bit. During the summer of 2018, I had taken it from August to November. I had taken some personal time off to deal with stress, depression, anxiety, all the mixed emotions. And during this time, that's when Ambrose had gotten hired with the company.
Mm-hmm.
And they were not aware of the situation of what was going on.
Okay.
So when I came back to work, I was like, whoa. And then when I came back to work, I had went to the HR department, and I had told them, I said, I told them the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I let them be aware of it in case anything came about or anything if I ever blew up at him, they would understand why I ever blew up at him.
Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is your supervisors, whatever position you are in, the people above you are aware that there was an incident between your missing son and Ambrose, and granted, if we are to understand that Ambrose was not the one holding the knife, but Ambrose was there, they are aware of all of that.
Correct.
Okay. And Ambrose has never brought up Austin since he was working there, since he started working there.
No.
No. Okay.
I try to keep it on. I keep it on a professional level.
All right.
I don't bring the outside into work. I leave it on the outside, even though I stay away from that subject there at work with him, or try to with everybody else. But he's aware of it, and he knows it, and he stays to himself. He don't come to me. He will stay. I would honestly say that he stays out of my eyesight.
Okay.
He avoids me. Yes.
Okay. Do you think that you would get in trouble if you ever brought up Austin to him at work?
Yes, I do believe I would get myself in trouble.
Okay. All right, that's just, I have to admit, I'm sure the listener's saying that's one of the weirder, stranger circumstances that I've run across in a case where we're not saying that Ambrose had anything to do with this disappearance, or not. But certainly, I think that there is enough evidence out there, enough information to believe that Ambrose was there when Clyde pulled this knife. Okay, I think that is something that I'm pretty sure happened, that Ambrose was there. And so this certainly, once again, does make it a strange situation for you to be in. And I'm guessing, would you say that you've gotten used to it, or would you say that it's still somewhat strange and awkward?
Strange and awkward at the same. I don't, like I told you before, I don't,
Mm-hmm.
I avoid it. I avoid it because if I do, I might blow up at him.
Sure.
I would want to confront him, but there is always going to be a time and place, but not at work.
Okay. Do you know if the police have ever talked to Ambrose about Austin's disappearance?
I don't know.
Don't know.
I can't say. I did tell the detectives that Ambrose does work with me, and that he's there. I don't know if they've ever talked to him or brought him in or questioned him. Did they?
Okay. That's all I'm asking.
Yeah.
I'm just asking, to your knowledge, has the police ever talked to him about Austin's disappearance?
No, not that I'm aware of.
So you have this unusual situation working with Ambrose, and I'm sure that listeners, it's going to probably be, because a lot of my former guests are listeners, and I'm sure they're probably putting themselves in your shoes right at this point and hearing that. So let's talk about this. What has the past year and so many months been like for you?
It's a roller coaster of emotions. It's just been total ups and downs, and unbelievable. I mean, it's totally unbelievable. And I know you'll probably always hear it all the time. I'm sure you hear it all the time that, you never thought this could happen to you.
Right.
Or happen to your family.
Right.
And
right.
I never ever thought it in my whole life, or let alone know anybody that has anybody, missing from their own family. I never don't know anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And for this to happen to me and my family is really mind-blowing.
It just doesn't seem possible, right? It just doesn't think like
Yeah.
this feels like some nightmare that you're going to wake up from.
You know, I'd always, the first 3 months, I would go to work, come home, go to work, come home, come straight home, hoping and praying I would see him sitting outside the door, or hoping and praying I come walking in and he'd be sitting right here, or I'd be waiting, phone call, middle of the night, the knock on my window, you know, hey Mom, it's me, can you open the door?
Mm-hmm.
You know, or the knock on the door in the middle of the night, you know, to see if, or the phone call from the detectives or police standing at my doorway, you know.
Yeah.
Or life flight going about, you know, I can hear life flight, the helicopter, the one from the hospital, I would hear it at night, and I'm thinking, oh God, I pray, is that my son? You know, I would pray every night, every day. You know, I would just go down the road, think, is that my son walking? You know, people that, you know, look like my son, but is not my son.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
it was just all kinds of emotions, and I didn't like the first. I mean, I literally could not take it at work. I had to take time off, like I had said before.
Yeah.
I took time off from August to November, which, you know, which is as much as I can was allowed to me through my company.
Yeah.
And during that time, I stayed home. I didn't want nobody to bother me. I didn't want, you know, I lived by myself, and it was just only me and my son here that we lived together in my apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And
With your cat Fred that you told me about before this interview started.
actually, he came a little bit later.
A little later, okay.
Yeah, a little later on he came, but it was just always just me and my son, and coming home, and it was like I just stayed to myself. I literally closed myself off to the world, to my family. I just closed myself in. I felt like my world was, I wouldn't say over. I just felt like everything was gone. My world was gone. You know, I lived for my son. We did everything together, you know. But while he was growing up, I always knew that there was a time when he would be on his own. He would become a young man. He would have his own family. He would go places, do things. He would have his own life. But never in a million years that I would ever think that or thought that he'd be gone missing.
Yeah.
And that his life don't know whether his life ended there or whether he's out there somewhere living his life. I don't know. And that's what hurt, is the unknowing, the not knowing.
Yes, that is a topic that comes up often. That and this is, I think, the big difference between missing persons cases and outright murder cases, where there is a body and maybe the suspects aren't caught yet, but a body is found. You know, we know what the method of the death was and all these things that, even though those situations are very difficult as well, there's not as much mystery, and there still could be some, of course, if the person or persons haven't been caught yet. But in missing persons cases, you got nothing. You have nothing. No answers at all. And this is what makes missing persons cases the most difficult. Of anything that law enforcement ever involves itself in, disappearance cases are the toughest. And everything that people can experience in their lives, from cancer to war to terrorism and things, what families go through regarding disappearances, right up there with all of those. As far as the pain and everything else, there's no doubt in my mind regarding that. None. And I know that on top of everything else is that we must remember, for the listeners, this is a relatively new disappearance from just last year. Whereas the average age of a case that we cover on Unfound is like 20 years old. So this is still very raw, of course. And I'm not saying that, but my job is to make sure it doesn't get to 20 years. We hope to be able to resolve this, get the word out there, me help you, continuing to help you even after you've been on the program in any capacity that you'd like, to make sure that whatever happened is that we find the answers before it gets to the 2-year, the 3-year, the 5-year anniversary. Okay, that's what I see my job to be. Okay, because I don't want you 20 years from now to still not have the answers, because unfortunately a lot of my guests are in that exact situation. Okay, so that's as I tell all my guests, we're going to try to do the most we can, the most we can for you, even after you've been on the program. Do you have a Facebook page set up for Austin? Anything like that?
No, not directly. I use my own Facebook page, and I just put whatever I can out there on, like, rewards. Fundraising. We've done a sunrise prayer for him, and next Saturday on the 8th of June, we're doing a prayer walk.
Okay.
Here on the reservation.
Okay, that'll be the day after this episode comes out, so that's good timing. That's good. Very good. Okay.
It'll be okay.
And being that we started off talking about your heritage, your ethnicity, of course, your culture to start this out, what do you think is going on in the Native American community with these disappearances? What is going on with that, do you think? What is... I know maybe, of course, you're experiencing it right firsthand, and I realize that every disappearance is a little different, but any insight into it at all that you can pass on to the rest of us?
I believe, in my son's case, I think it has to do with drugs. I think it has to do with money and drugs. Maybe he was, I'm not saying he was caught up into a lot of drugs or not. I do believe it has something to do with drugs and money.
And do you think that's
blamed for it? Or whether somebody might have mistaken him for somebody else.
Okay.
But in
the Native American community overall, of course, like I said, it seems like within the last 6 months, to my perception, there seem to be a lot of more articles about disappearances in the Native American community. And do you think that law enforcement is not taking them seriously? Do you think that there's something else going on? Once again, this is your culture. It's not a culture that I'm, not been a part of. I haven't been around many Native American people in my life, to be honest with you. I don't know about my listeners, but do you perceive the overall situation to be something that is fixable?
It can be fixable, but it's totally up to the community. Mm-hmm. I mean, even though communities are close, there's that that thing about but you don't want to tell anybody. You just want to keep it to yourself. You don't want to be involved. It's how do I put it? It's like gossip, but you don't want people to come back and say, "Oh, well, she said this and he said that."
Mm-hmm.
But they don't want to say anything. They don't want to say, "Yeah, I know this and I know that. I heard this from so and so." They just don't want to be involved.
Yeah.
And that's why we're having this prayer walk. I'm hoping that this prayer walk, will bring people out to talk, will bring them out to say something, to give them that awareness that whatever's going on out there in the community, people have to be aware. People have to be aware of this, and that they have to be aware of their surroundings, be aware of who they associate themselves with, be aware of, the people next door, what's going on, because it can happen to anybody,
Yeah.
If it can happen to me, it can happen to them and their children,
Yeah.
They need to be aware and not sit there behind closed doors and think that, oh, this ain't going to happen to me. This ain't going to happen to my children.
Mm-hmm.
It's there. And it feels like it's just getting closer and closer. More people are going to be coming missing. And I don't want to say that like I know it, but it just feels like it. Just the different people that are coming into our community, the different people that people are allowing to come into the community that are dealing drugs, are doing drugs, and they're allowing it. And I hate to say this, but the tribal police are allowing the drugs to come into our community. They're allowing it to keep going and watching these people go in and out of these drug houses. They're allowing that. They're allowing these other people to come in and disturb the community.
Why do you think they let that happen?
Because they don't want to be involved. They don't want to enforce the law. They don't want to, maybe because it's their own relatives that's doing the dealings or the drugs, and they don't want their families to be sitting behind bars or dealing with, the shame of saying, yeah, that's my family member. That's my family member that's dealing the drugs. That's my family member that's doing the drugs. To them it's shameful instead of upholding the law.
It is shameful. I agree. Susan, do you have any last words before we complete this interview?
If anybody knows anything, the whereabouts of my son, or even if my son is listening, I really appreciate it if they would come forth and say something. They just say what they know instead of hiding it and keeping it to themselves. And if my son is listening, son, just come home. We all love you. We all miss you. There's not a day that we don't think about you. But I do appreciate your time and your thoughtfulness and to allowing this interview to happen,
Mm-hmm.
And I pray that one day he will come home.
Susan, thank you for being on this episode of Unfound.
You're welcome, and thank you.
And that was my June 2019 interview with Susan Pevo, mother of Austin Pevo. I've spoken to her about once a month since that interview. Susan told me right away when the remains were found in September, and we both grew frustrated with the DNA results taking so long to be obtained. Susan and her family have Unfound's deepest condolences. If you will remember back to over a month ago, when I did the In Memoriam for Crystal Morrison, I talked about how I got her disappearance wrong. I was convinced there was some kind of foul play. We now know that wasn't what happened. However, in Austin's, I'll take you back to my exact words from the summation of that episode. Quote, "What bothers me most is no one saw Austin walking that morning after he left his boss's house. That certainly could lead us to think something happened there, and not somewhere else if something did happen to Austin at all." To go back to Crystal's disappearance once again for just a moment, why I think so many people got her case wrong is we put things into evidence that didn't exist. We took for granted that somebody picked her up. Despite there being no proof, she contacted anyone except the man who was supposed to pick her up that day. We took for granted she went back to using drugs, despite there being no proof of that as well. Big mistakes. Whereas, even though there were reasons to believe Clyde was the main perpetrator of Austin's disappearance, lots of reasons, I can see in my summation of Austin's case that I might have learned some lessons between Crystal's coverage in 2017 and Austin's in 2019. The main lesson: do not assume things that have no reason to be assumed. And I think that's where my suspicion of something happening in the boss's house came from, despite Clyde being a very good suspect in Austin's disappearance. I somewhat rejected Austin leaving the house because no one saw him. In fact, to be even more precise, it wasn't even that no one saw Austin walking that morning. It was that the guys there said he called someone from the boss's phone before he left, because Austin didn't have his own cell phone with him. And you heard me ask Susan, whose numbers would Austin have known off the top of his head to be able to call anyone? Her answer: not many people. I know the answer tripped something off in my brain. And at that time, it tripped off something in some of your brains as well. I saw your comments. To be more explicit, if Austin only knew a couple phone numbers off the top of his head, and those people say they didn't see him, then just maybe he really didn't make that call at all. Couple that with no one seeing him walking that day, and some people came to the conclusion that something happened in the boss's house, despite Clyde and the knife incident from the night before. Now, to be honest, and I'm always honest with all of you, in the private Patreon blog I wrote for Austin's disappearance, where one of my rules is I have to make a definitive choice and can't be wishy-washy, I decided that Clyde murdered Austin. Why? Because despite everything above, It's hard to predict a situation where somebody is going to be killed by his coworkers. And we still don't have that answer. In saying that, though, one of the suggestions I wrote was that Susan needed to see the phone records of Austin's boss and the coworkers. So still, there was something nagging at me about what exactly happened in the house that day. The question now is, what happened in that house? What happened that caused Justin Beasley to allegedly stab Austin, and the other two, Blandon Kobe and Alden Brewster, to be accomplices? Blandon was Austin's boss, by the way. How could things seemingly go bad so fast? Or had something been building for a while, and that morning everything came to a head? We don't know yet. Even if Clyde isn't involved, could Austin's murder still be connected to the incident from the night before in some way? I say that because Clyde drew a knife on Austin the night before. Then the very next morning, Austin is knifed to death. Coincidence? Did we misinterpret the night before? Was it not just Clyde who had something in for Austin, but a group of people? If so, what could that reason be? Hopefully, we will get all these answers eventually. Beasley's case is expected to go to trial on June 2nd, and Kobe's trial is expected to begin on June 22nd. Both trials are scheduled at the federal courthouse in Pocatello. Brewster does not yet have a scheduled trial date, according to court records. Austin Pevo, please rest in peace. And that's the program. If you found it informative, please go to the app that you use to listen to Unfound and give this podcast a nice review. I thank you for listening. I'm Ed Densel, and you've been listening to Unfound.